How fun is this? I literally was at a wedding 10 minutes ago. I'm in Jerusalem. I was at a wedding 10 minutes ago. How can you go from one simcha to now being able to like share with you guys all over the world? This is epic, 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 beyond epic. I love technology and I love living in Israel. Okay, awesome. So let's jump right in. All right. So, what are we going to talk about today? What are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about a story. Stories. What's in a story? What's in a story? Well, if you don't believe in manifestation, then your story probably doesn't mean much to you. However, if you believe the premise that thoughts become things, then you know that the story is the portal that manifests your entire future. Your future exists in your story. There's a line that I want you to remember for the duration of this talk, and that you tell yourself about yourself become your reality. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Let's back up. Let's start from the beginning. 1987, Columbia Presbyterian, Upper West Side, I was born. I came into this world and I saw this world as a playground of possibility, a playground of opportunity. Nothing was a limitation. And that goes for me, that goes for you. We come into this world and anything is possible, right? So much so that if you think back to childhood, think back to when you celebrated Purim or Halloween, right? As a little girl or a little boy, what did you dress up as? If you are a girl, you probably dressed up as a princess. And if you're a boy, you probably dressed up as a superhero. Why? Why is it that as little... Right? And what happens the moment we put on that princess gown? It's not that we think we're a princess. The moment we put on that dress, we embody, we become that princess. And there's nobody or nothing that can tell us otherwise. Until perhaps we start school and a teacher calls us stupid, God forbid, or a parent ignores us, or a friend of ours doesn't want to be our friend anymore. Right? And then what happens? Right? Our stories begin to take over. So I'll give you a personal example. From my own life. When I was 8 years old, I had my first crush on a boy. True story. First crush on a boy. His name was Tommy. And when I would walk down the hallways, I would see Tommy looking at me. And in my mind, I was convinced. I thought that Tommy liked me back. Because when a boy looks at you in the hallway, what else could you possibly think? Right? And then one day during recess, I was on one side of the gymnasium. Tommy was on the other side. And I see him begin to approach me. And I have a feeling that he's going to tap me on my shoulder and tell me something that I want to hear. And so he does. He approaches me. He taps me on my shoulder. Only what he says is this. He says, Ayelet, I don't like you. Not even a little bit. Get that through your thick head. Now you can imagine, 8-year-old me, naive. I didn't know any better. Right? So of course, in that moment, what do? Right? I put on all of my Sephardi sass and I look at him and I was like, okay, I don't like you either. I don't care. Right? But really what happened, I grabbed my best friend, I dragged her to the bathroom and I cried and I cried and I cried. Right? And what was the story that I told myself about myself in that moment? Right? The story I told myself about myself looked something like this. I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty, I'm not worthy, nobody's gonna like me, no boy's ever gonna like me. And then what happens? I get older, I become a teenager, and I put up these walls, I put up these barriers that block me, that get in the way from accessing and receiving and even accepting true love, true connection, real relationship. Because I have this childhood voice in the back of my head that says, you're not lovable. Simply because Tommy didn't like me. Right? So again, I'm bringing it back. The manifestation is all about rewriting that story, because the premise of thoughts become things. I'll prove it. If any of you have ever been to a magic show and you've heard the words abracadabra, abracadabra, right? We've all heard the words abracadabra. Now you see it, now you don't. Rabbit out of a hat, yeah? Many of us don't realize that abracadabra is actually the language of Aramaic, which is Old Hebrew, and it stands for bara keda bera, bara. It gets created, kedibu, is as I speak. Things get created through speech. Speech, according to Kabbalah, is the direct link between the spiritual and the physical world, our speech. What we say has a vibrational frequency, and it is encoding the cosmos with information constantly that is telling the universe, telling God's universe, what it is we want in any given moment. And since thought translates to speech, and speech often translates to action, right? Our thoughts, speech, and action, when they are aligned, can manifest. But when we're not aligned, then what do? We manifest anyways, but we're not always manifesting according to we're not always manifesting a positive outcome, right? So we have to understand, first and foremost, where do our stories come from, right? Speech. Speech is the greatest tool that human beings possessed. The great sage, the commentator of the Torah, Onkelos, says that speech is what makes us a living being, because our speech is what infuses us with spirit, right? So because if you think about it, animals, you look at animals, they don't have the same type of communication, the same type of speech that human beings have. We are the species that have this co-creative capability, right? If we are all made in Tselem Elokim, meaning we're made in the image of God, and each of us possesses a God particle within us, then it goes without saying, abracadabra, it gets created as I speak. Hashem, God, the divine, created the universe through speech, the 10 utterances. Right? So how much more so if we are a microcosm of this macro energy called God, right? Then we have the ability to also co-create. But we have to go back to our story. What is your story that is either manifesting or blocking your desire for manifesting? A story can also block a desire for manifesting. I'll give you an example. When I was younger, my mother used to say, Ayelet, I am not an ATM. She speaks Hebrew. So Ayelet, I am not a kaspomat. Okay? If you want to learn the value of $1, then go to work. Right? Because I had a bad habit of maxing out credit cards when I was a teenager. Okay, so she used to say, I'm not a bank account. And she would go on and say, Ayelet, money does not grow on trees. So I'd say, okay, now as an adult, now that I know the art of manifestation, I can say, hold on a moment, Mama, I see where you're coming from. However, let's reframe. Let's change that story. Because if you think about it, really, money comes from paper. Paper comes from trees. Therefore, money grows on trees. Right? So if you just take the story that you adopted from your society, from your community as a child, and you rewrite that story, then you start to present yourself in life with a new narrative. And that narrative is what will manifest. You are using the law of attraction, whether you like it or not. Every thought you think is determining the next moment. And every thought you think again is determining the very next moment, and then the very next moment, and then the very next moment. And since we said speech is the direct link between the physical and the spiritual, what we say becomes things. I'm wondering if you guys can comment. If you want to comment in the chat box, you're welcome to if you have any questions. So when I was 20 years old, I was at a sleepover with a girlfriend, and I woke up in the morning and I had 87 missed calls and text messages. And so initially I thought that it was just my mom trying to get in touch with me, right? So like a proper 20-year-old, what do? I ignore the messages and I go straight onto social media. And as I'm scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, I come across post after post that says, "Rest in peace, Dawn. We love you, Dawn. You will always be remembered, Dawn." And then it dawned on me. I kept scrolling, and I saw a picture of my childhood friend, Danielle. And my heart dropped to my stomach. And I called up a friend of mine to find out what had happened. And she said that last night, Dawn was stood up by the guy she was seeing. And so she called up her other best friend. We'll call her best friend D. Dawn called up D and she said, "I got stood up. What are you doing tonight?" So D was like, "Oh, come hang out. I know a bunch of biker guys that hang out at the local Starbucks. We'll go, we'll chill there, we'll have a good time." So they go. Okay, to make a long story short, a couple of the guys wanted to cross the George Washington Bridge to grab a bite to eat. Dawn had a bad feeling about getting on the back of a bike. Her gut told her not to get on the bike. D, being, the friend that she was and wanting to have a good time and wanting to make Dawn feel better about being stood up, convinced Dawn to get on the back of the bike. So finally, Dawn gets on the back of the bike. Dawn rides up ahead. She's crossing the bridge. D was a little bit further behind. As D catches up, she notices in the middle of the George Washington Bridge the pink jacket that Dawn wore that night. And she starts to freak out. She rides up ahead a little bit and she sees Dawn laying there in the middle of the bridge. She was still alive, Dawn. And so Dee hops off her bike, holds Dawn in her arms, and Dawn, the last words she said before she passes away were, "Dee, I love you and it's not your fault." I remember hearing this story and thinking to myself, Ayelet, for 20 years you've been alive, but you have not yet begun to live. And I was determined to start. I was determined to find out why I was placed here. What is my purpose? What was I meant to be doing? So I ended up at Barnes & Noble's. I went straight to the self-help section, and like a sign from above, a book titled Buddha fell off the shelf. So I took it as a sign. I went, I read it, and I started picking up on new concepts like selflessness and compassion and forgiveness, things that should be a given. And I was so lit up by these concepts that I went back to the self-help section and I read book after book after book after book. 2 years went by and I realized I had reached a glass ceiling. I realized that I needed the experience. So I sold a bunch of designer bags, booked a trip, went straight to India. What I thought was supposed to be a 21-day retreat in India with a guru ended up turning into 6 years. I spent 6 years living in that culture, within the Hindu philosophy. And just before my 6 years was up, I attended the largest festival of consciousness on the planet called Benmeleh. It takes place in the middle of the desert in India. Okay, so I'm at Benmeleh, and when I say the largest festival of consciousness, I'm talking 50 million Hindus, 50 million Hindus, and me. And while we're there, we were doing some really, really intense mind-body stuff. We were using we were really tapping into mind control, teaching our mind to control the facets and functions of our body. So we were training ourselves to go a month long without eating any food, just water and tea. We were training ourselves to survive off 2 hours of sleep a night, like really, really tough stuff. Minimum 8 hours of meditation a day. Anyways, at one point during Kumbh Mela, I was just so exhausted. So when the guru had told us that we have a 30-minute break, I took my backpack and I curled up in a ball, and I used my backpack as a pillow, and I fell into a deep sleep. Now, let me pause for a second before I continue. My camp at Kumbh Mela, remember, we're in the middle of the desert. There's no solid structure there. It's all tent. It's like thousands and thousands and thousands of tents. My tent had 10,000 people in it. 10,000 people. So you can imagine, just visualize how big a structure a tent has to be to fit 10,000 people. Suddenly, while I'm in my deep sleep, I hear a loud noise, a loud banging noise. And so I open one eye. I feel like I'm still in this sleep state, dream state. I'm not so sure. I close my eyes again, and the noise gets louder. The banging noise gets louder. I open my eyes, and this time I realize I am not asleep, but I'm in the middle of a very real tornado. So much so that the walls of this tent started pulsing like they had a heartbeat. And the winds got so intense that the walls, the fabric of the tent began ripping. Now, this tent is massive. It's huge. If it collapsed, we're done for. So once everyone realized, because water was rising, we were like mud to our knees. And once people realized that we were in the middle of a tornado, 10,000 people ran to 2 tiny exit doors. Now imagine that traffic jam. So I realized that if I get in line and I follow 10,000 people, that this structure is going to collapse and I'm going to be done for. So in the corner of my eye, I see a dip in the corner of the tent, and I realized I needed a plan B. So I slid under the tent. I find myself outside, and it's like the first scene out of The Wizard of Oz. There's metal poles flying, debris everywhere, people screaming, trying to find shelter. But there was no structure. We were in the middle of the desert. There was nowhere to go for shelter. Until I realized a large transportation truck. And I said, it's my only hope for survival. I slid under the truck, and I have my eyes closed, and I am just praying. I'm praying. Please, 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 God, don't let me die here. Don't let me die here. Don't let me die here. And suddenly I hear, coming from my right side, a woman's voice. So I look over, and this elderly woman with piercing blue eyes looks me in the eyes, and she says, darling, don't worry. At least if we die with our guru. And I just look at her in my head. I'm thinking, you're out of your mind, lady. You're out of your mind. I am not ready to die, not with my guru, not with nobody. Like, I have a family who loves me. I have siblings. I have parents. I have a future. Like, no way. So I close my eyes again, and this time, I say, God, if you're out there, if you can hear me, Hashem Echad. suddenly everything gets quiet. Everything got silent. Within 5 seconds, the tornado subsided. And in that moment is when I realized that not only when we speak words of intention from a place of real faith, not only does God hear us, but he creates miracles. Miracles. So fast forward a few months, and the guru had invited 20 of us on a 4-month bus tour of southern India. Now, before the bus was going to depart from the ashram, we had a week. So I went to Bombay, and I had some friends in Bombay. I said, you know what, before we go live on a bus, because it wasn't going to be anything luxurious, before we go live on a bus, let me go spoil myself for a week. So I'm sitting by the pool, I'm in Bombay, I'm in meditation, and I'm doing my meditative work, I'm doing my visualization, I'm doing my manifestation work. And while I'm in my meditation, now for any of you who have tried meditating, you know that when your mind is active, your thoughts are racing, even if you try to bring your awareness back to your breath, it's incredibly challenging. And so I found myself trying to meditate, but this voice kept trying to come in, and I kept pushing it away. And it kept getting louder, and I kept pushing it away until finally this voice just got so loud that I said, okay, maybe this is a message. What is it that you're trying to tell me? And the voice, clear as this conversation right here, right now, the voice said, Ayelet, don't waste another minute. Leave this country now and go to Israel. Now, within 30 minutes, I had my flight booked. The next day I landed without a plan, without anywhere to sleep, without understanding why I was being guided. I landed. What happens when you turn off your decisions? Thing that creates alignment for you. Right? It'll just come back. If you ignore that voice, it just comes back and tests you in a bigger way. And I had meditated at that point for thousands and thousands of hours, that I learned how to quiet the mind and listen to that voice. And so I know that when you listen to that divine guidance and you don't hesitate, you don't postpone, you just listen to that divine guidance and you take responsibility for your life without fear, with total emunah, with total trust that you will be supported, then that divine guidance does what I call forehead kisses from God constantly. The moment I landed in Israel, it was like one forehead kiss after another, after another, after another. So much so that after a month of being in Tel Aviv, I was drawn to Jerusalem. I enrolled in seminary, started learning Torah and Chassidut. And I took the manifestation work that I learned in India and I started connecting to big mystics and Kabbalists and rabbis and learning how to take this wisdom of abracadabra. It gets created as I speak, and rewriting my story and surrendering. There's a whole ABRA system. I teach in the Manifestation Mindset online course, the whole ABRA system of how to get clear, how to ask for what it is that you want and get clear, how to work on your belief that anything is possible, right? How to surrender, have an inner space of surrender, because surrender renders miracles. And also how to live with an attitude of gratitude. That's the ABRA system, A-B-R-A. Ask, believe, receive, acknowledge. Right? So I became obsessed with co-creating, right? Because it's what gave me the motivation when I lived life constantly receiving forehead kisses from Hashem, from God. Right? I realized that I am constantly in a state of being guided. And when you live from a state of knowing you are guided, you don't fear. You can't fear. If you knew who was guiding you, you could not fear. And so I learned to use my speech and how to rewrite my story in order to manifest. And so the biggest forehead kiss that I received was 8 months after arriving in Israel. I was sitting at lunch with 5 of my girlfriends. It is my intention, God, if it is your will, or this year, if it is your will, or something better. I always ask for something better because ultimately God's the one. Married on May 29th. With full belief that God can create on its own. Right? If I just Hashem creates miracles. Result is wedged in the initial thought. Danielle, who died in the motorcycle accident. Thought. And I felt it with my whole being. But I had not yet begun to live. But I knew why I wanted it. I let go of that. I would spend 2 years in the self-help section of Barnes. Manifest into 6 more years of India lifestyle. I had no idea I'd be caught in a tornado that would plant another seed of thought, another intention for a miracle that would then take me out of India, place me in Israel, to the place where my soul feels the most at home, to the place where I met my husband and now raise my children. When you change your story, you change your life. Miracles are real. Believe in possibility, and then anything becomes possible. You can see that if you look at it from one perspective, if you see the word impossible written out in front of you, visualize it, you see it either says impossible, or you can see it from a new perspective. If you put a space between the M and the P, it spells I'm possible. I am a living, breathing possibility. Make the lens of anything is possible your new story and start to see miracles manifest for you. Thanks so much for tuning in, and happy manifesting.